It was late evening, the kind of quiet night where the city seemed to finally exhale after a long day. Colonel Grace Walker, a highly decorated African-American Army officer, was driving home from a military event, her crisp uniform still on, her chest carrying the weight of medals and ribbons that told the story of a lifetime of service. She was tired but proud, thinking of her late father who had once told her, "Service to others is the highest honor." But her calm drive home was suddenly shattered by flashing red and blue lights in her rear-view mirror. Her heart sank, not out of guilt, she had done nothing wrong, but from a feeling she knew all too well, the uneasy tension of being a black woman pulled over late at night. Still, her military discipline held her steady. She guided her car to the side of the road, turned off the engine, and placed her hands visibly on the steering wheel, a small but necessary act of self-preservation. A young police officer, barely in his 20s, stepped out of the squad car. His body language betrayed his nerves. His hand clutched his holstered gun before he even approached the window. Then, with a sudden, unnecessary motion, he pulled the weapon out completely, aiming it toward her as if she were a dangerous threat. Grace felt a chill run down her spine, but her face remained calm, her posture firm. Years of military service had trained her not to react to fear but to control it. Slowly, she turned her head and looked directly at him. Her steady gaze met his frantic eyes. "Sir, my hands are right here," she said evenly, her voice calm yet commanding. "I am unarmed." But the officer's grip tightened on the gun. His breathing was heavy, his voice sharp as he shouted, "Step out of the vehicle. Now." Inside, Grace's heart beat harder, but she refused to show weakness. She had led soldiers through war zones. She had stared down enemies far more dangerous than this frightened young man. And yet, in that moment, she realized the true danger wasn't his weapon, it was his fear. This was no ordinary traffic stop. It was a collision of prejudice and courage, of suspicion and dignity. And it was only the beginning of a night neither of them would ever forget. Grace didn't move. Her hands stayed firmly on the steering wheel, fingers spread wide, every gesture deliberate. She knew one wrong move, one misinterpreted motion, could escalate this fragile moment into tragedy. The young officer's eyes darted nervously, his gun trembling in his grip. Sweat ran down his temple, though the night air was cool. He barked again, louder this time, his voice cracking under the weight of authority he wasn't ready for. "Out of the car. Now." Grace inhaled slowly, steadying her own pulse. She could see it in his eyes, not hatred, not malice, but fear. Fear so strong it distorted judgment, fear so blinding it saw a threat instead of a woman in uniform. With calm precision, Grace tilted her head slightly toward him. Her voice came out firm, steady, but touched with compassion. "Officer, look at me. Really look. You don't need that weapon. I am not your enemy." For a flicker of a second, the officer's gaze faltered. His eyes darted from her face to the glint of her military medals pinned to her jacket. He hesitated, but the gun still hovered, shaking. Grace's tone softened, but her words carried weight. "I've served this country for over 20 years. Longer than you've been in uniform. I've seen young men like you in combat zones, hands shaking, fear written all over their faces. And do you know what I told them?" The officer's grip wavered, his breathing loud in the silence of the night. He didn't answer, but his eyes betrayed curiosity, confusion, even shame. Grace continued, her voice low and steady, commanding not by force but by wisdom. "I told them, courage is not pulling the trigger out of fear. Courage is standing tall enough to see the human being in front of you." The words hung in the air like a lifeline. The tension between them was thick, but Grace never broke eye contact. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't angry. She was teaching, guiding, holding out a chance for this young man to choose better. And for the first time since he had drawn his weapon, the officer blinked, as though something inside him had cracked, something that had been blind just moments before. This wasn't a standoff anymore. It was a turning point. The young officer's hands trembled as he struggled to hold his weapon steady. His training told him to stay in control, but his heart raced with doubt. Grace hadn't moved an inch, her calm presence was disarming in a way he didn't expect. Then, as his eyes darted toward her car's dashboard, something caught his attention. A folded American flag, carefully placed inside a protective glass case. His eyes lingered, drawn to the symbolism. That flag wasn't decoration, it was honor, sacrifice, legacy. Next to it lay her military ID, still visible through the wallet she had intentionally set on the console. And on her uniform, the glimmer of medals. Silver Star. Bronze Star. A Purple Heart. Symbols he had only read about in textbooks, never seen up close. The sight struck him like a wave of cold water. His gun lowered a fraction, his arm heavy now not from fear but from shame. He finally saw her, not as a suspect, but as someone who had walked battlefields, who had defended freedoms. Including his own. Grace noticed his hesitation. She spoke again, steady and clear. "You see this flag? That one was handed to me when I buried a brother in arms. A young man who died protecting his unit. I carry it with me to remember him, and to remind myself that we don't fight for skin color, or uniforms, or badges. We fight for each other." The officer swallowed hard, his throat tightening. His eyes flicked from her face back to the medals, the flag, the ID. The reality was undeniable, this woman had given more to the country than he had yet even imagined. And here he was, pointing a weapon at her, out of fear, out of prejudice, out of ignorance. His gun arm sank lower, finally dropping to his side. His lips parted as though to speak, but no words came. Guilt weighed heavy on him, pressing down harder than any command or reprimand ever could. In that moment, the young officer wasn't a cop facing a traffic stop. He was a boy staring into the eyes of a veteran who embodied everything he wished to be: courageous, disciplined, selfless. And for the first time that night, he saw her not as a stranger, but as a hero. The silence between them was no longer dangerous. It was transformative. The young officer stood frozen, his weapon now lowered but his shame rising like a tide. His chest heaved as he tried to steady himself, yet the weight of his mistake pressed down heavier than his duty belt. He expected anger. He expected harsh words, maybe even official consequences. But what came next was something he never could have predicted. Colonel Grace Walker slowly unfastened her seatbelt and stepped out of the car. Every motion was calm, measured, intentional. She stood tall, her posture that of a leader who had faced chaos far greater than this. Her uniform seemed to glow beneath the streetlights, carrying an aura of dignity that no badge or rank could match. The officer instinctively stepped back, unsure of what she would do. His shame burned deeper with each second of silence. But then, Grace closed the distance between them, not with hostility, but with presence. She raised her hand slowly, not to strike or scold, but to place it gently on his shoulder. Her touch was firm, steady. Her eyes, though piercing, held compassion. "Fear is powerful," she said softly. "It can make good men do terrible things. I've seen soldiers pull triggers out of fear, and I've seen lives shattered because of it. But listen to me, son, fear doesn't make you weak. What makes you weak is letting it control you." The young officer's throat tightened. His eyes burned, but he blinked rapidly, unwilling to let tears fall in front of her. He felt smaller under her gaze, yet oddly lighter, as if her words were lifting something he hadn't realized he carried. Grace continued, her voice calm but commanding. "You didn't point that gun at me because you're evil. You pointed it because you couldn't see past your own fear. But you have a choice. You can keep living that way, reacting, judging, harming, or you can rise above it. You can choose respect. You can choose humanity." Her words pierced him more deeply than any reprimand ever could. The shame in his chest cracked into something else, realization, regret, and a faint spark of resolve. He lowered his head, whispering almost to himself, I'm sorry. Grace gave a faint nod, squeezing his shoulder once before stepping back. Don't waste your apology, she said. Prove it in the way you treat people. That's how you change. That's how you honor this badge. For the first time, he truly listened. The night had grown quiet again, though the air between them still carried the weight of what had just happened. The officer stood there, his gun holstered, his pride fractured, his heart pounding not from adrenaline anymore but from humility. Colonel Grace Walker, still composed, gave him a long, steady look. Her silence wasn't judgmental, it was patient, like a mentor waiting for a student to grasp a lesson. The young officer finally spoke, his voice trembling. I could have ruined everything tonight. He cut himself off, unable to finish the thought. Grace's expression softened, though her words remained firm. You almost let fear make a decision you would never take back. But the fact that you see it now, that's where change begins. He swallowed hard, guilt twisting in his chest. He wanted to ask for forgiveness, but he sensed she had already given it, not through words, but through the grace she had shown him. Then, without thinking, his body moved with instinct born of respect. He straightened, heels together, and raised his hand to his brow in a crisp salute. His arm wavered slightly, not from doubt but from the depth of the emotion behind it. For a moment, time stood still. Grace's eyes softened, and slowly, she returned the salute, not as a colonel reminding him of her rank, but as a human being acknowledging his potential. The exchange was silent, yet louder than any lecture could ever be. When his hand lowered, his face was damp with tears he no longer tried to hide. His voice cracked, but it carried conviction. I won't forget this. I swear. I'll never see people the same way again. Grace nodded once, her gaze steady. Good. Remember, courage isn't in the weapon you carry. It's in the humanity you choose to honor. With that, she turned, walking back to her car with the same quiet strength she had shown throughout. She started the engine, the flag on her dashboard catching the glow of the streetlight, and drove away into the night. The officer stood alone on that empty road, the echo of her words carved into his heart. He knew his career, his outlook, even his very sense of self had shifted forever. And for the first time in his young life, he understood that compassion, more than authority, more than fear, was the truest form of courage.